Hello, as usual, I am Jamey from Stonemaier Games, and I'm joined today for today's conversation by a special guest, Kaleb, who I haven't seen in person in years, so it was so wonderful to see Kaleb on camera today. Kaleb, why don't you let everyone know who you are?
Hi, Jamey. I'm everybody. My name is Kaleb Michaud. I'm the director of Spielbound, a nonprofit here in Omaha, Nebraska, dedicated to promoting the use and play of board games to improve everyone's lives.
Nice. And what does that mean exactly? I know it more as a game cafe, but I think it's a lot more than that as well, right?
That's right. We have Spielbound Board Game Cafe, which supports our nonprofit mission. We've been around, we'll be in business. We've been open for 9 years come September 2nd. And we have many different programs, which is why I didn't want to go too far into it, from education to staying sharp when you get older, to daily demos, to and cataloging and skill masons. So we keep very busy with all of our many volunteers here in Omaha.
Well, that's awesome. A lot of these videos that have been with kind of random people in the hobby, so it's fun to speak with someone who is in the game industry and to hear your opinions about the games that we're talking about today.
I'm glad to be here. And
Yeah.
I tell you, I have a very large board game collection, but
Mhm.
everyone assumes I've played everything. And I was like, oh, no, just a small amount. But I do take joy in seeing other people play them. So
Well, I'm excited to talk about today's topic. Today we're talking about rondel games, which is a topic that you selected. The way that I define rondel games are games with a circular action or benefit selection system. Your definition might be a little bit different. Why don't you let me know like why you chose this mechanism for the topic and how you define rondel games?
I played a new game earlier this spring that I loved, and I thought this is such a unique use of the rondel. And I go, wait a minute, I really like these games with the rondel mechanic. And I kept on going, wait a minute, there's more and more that I really like, and these are fantastic. And so I actually I'm a researcher, and I did more research on it, and I found that it came from one designer who had the Rondel Games series back in 2005, and that sort of led to this becoming more and more used. But I will tell you that we got into many arguments about what is and what isn't a rondel. So you might have some on your list that didn't make mine because I decided that they weren't rondel.
Okay, we'll see if those come up while we chat. Um, Okay, well, let's jump in. I'm going to go over the ambassador picks right here. Kaleb is also an ambassador, but I asked some of our ambassadors what their favorite Rondell games are. And the games that were named multiple times by multiple ambassadors, I'll go through them real quick. Crown of Amara, Crusaders Thy Will Be Done, Glen More 2, Great Western Trail, Heaven and Ale, Iki, Maracaibo, Merchants of the Dark Road, Merlin, Patchwork, Praga Caput Regni, Red Cathedral, Teotihuacan, Terra Mystica, Three Sisters, Trajan, Viscounts of the West Kingdom. And I will say, I love Terra Mystica. It probably would have made my list. I didn't quite count that as a rondel for this. It was really close, but would you count the Mancala, the Magic Mancala in it?
I would not, and
Okay.
and several of the games you listed will be on my would have been on the list if I thought they were true
Okay.
rondels. So yes.
Nice. Well, let's start out with your honorable mentions. Do you have any that didn't quite make your top five that you wanted to mention?
I do, and I one that wasn't mentioned on there. I thought the best use of a rondel with the theme of the game is a game that I first played when I last met with you in person almost 10 years ago at Gen Con
Uh-huh.
was Murano, and this is here from my in the Spielbound game library. I was just at Murano a month ago,
Oh, wow.
and to see
Uh-huh.
this sort of in Venice was amazing. But it uses the rondel to sort of you have the gondolas around the island, and they get in the way, and you can't go to the action that you want until you pay that gondolier to move out of the way so you can move your gondola there. And I just thought it was such a unique, fun use of the rondel mechanic. So
That's
Murano
really
would be
funny.
my definitely uh, support there on that one.
Nice. Do you have any other honorable mentions or just that one?
I do. Sorry,
Yeah.
I also have Crusaders.
Okay.
I thought
Yeah.
this one and Finca would be my favorites because you're going to see my list. And they tend to be more on the complex side. These
Uh-huh.
are my favorite ones with the rondel mechanic that take less than an hour.
Okay.
Truly true rondel mechanic is very important to it, and I greatly appreciate it. And then lastly, I want to give a shout out to, I think, the grandfather of the rondel mechanic, Matt Gertz. And I loved Transatlantic and Imperial and a lot of Antique, I don't know how it's pronounced, from 2005. And this is Crossing Oceans, which is a re-implementation of Transatlantic, where all he did is he took away a complex mechanic of card playing and just made it a rondel, just like his prior games. And I thought that simplified it, but also made it very strategic and challenging.
Interesting. I'll have to check that one out. I don't know much about that one. My honorable mentions are Teotihuacan, Great Western Trail, Trajan, Merchants of the Dark Road, the Red Cathedral, a lot of these that were on the ambassador list, Viscounts of the West Kingdom, Maracaibo, and Barrage. Barrage was one I added at the last minute that I kind of remembered. That is, I consider that some of a rondel. You're smiling here, so either that's on your list or you don't consider it rondel.
I don't, and because we had so many conversations about this, because the having a circle keep track of time and resources depletion is very different than having it be the mechanic of how you take your actions. And I think I excluded that. And I'll make the case, maybe because it'll probably be on your list. I had Glen More very high up on my choice, but in the end I chose it. Wasn't a rondel in my mind because there's nothing rondel about it except the fact that it goes in a circle on the board just to keep it on the table. But it seemed like you never repeated back to the same action, and it was basically a long line that continued to get higher and higher, that you were just had a limit of how far you could go down that line. Very similar to Tokaido, but that's somewhat semantics. But I do like the idea of coming back to the same actions over and over again on the same circle.
Yeah, that's true. Glen More will appear on my list, but that makes perfect sense. I think that you're right that it is essentially a line that it does feel a little bit different than a game like Namiji, which is, the follow-up to Tokaido, where you're going in a circle, but you never go around that circle more than once. And so that's maybe where I just differentiate a little bit. But
it would have been number 2 on my list.
Would have been number,
so
okay.
I made room for others.
Well, what is your number 5 favorite rondel game here, Kaleb?
Number 5 is a new one called Iki, which was mentioned on there as well. Seems weird because I've owned it for several years, but I didn't play it until it was nominated recently for the Kennerspiel Spiel des Jahres. I've played it several times since then. It is by far the most beautiful game that I'm nominating here for the top 5. It is not short. I'm surprised that it got the nomination, actually. But this is by far the definition of everything about the game is about moving your character in one of 8 spaces in a circle up and down the streets. And it's truly about getting that right exactly where you want to be for the action that you want. It is challenging. It's so beautiful to look at. Even though it's complex and takes a while, it's not so much that I couldn't play it with my parents, which I thought was an important key.
Neat. Are you blocking those spaces from other players using them, or is it a private or public rondel?
It is a public rondel, but you're spending so much time choosing the order of how many spaces your big meeple, and grande meeple from viticulture would go around. And you are rewarded for going more spaces because all of your workers improve in their quality. But it's harder to do that and also get the selection that you want by going last.
Interesting. I need to play that one. Yeah. Especially now that it's on your list. Iki at number 5. I have Heaven and Ale at number 5. And now that I'm hearing your definition, I'm like, are these rondel games? I don't know, but I enjoy Heaven and Ale. It is a somewhat circular game.
That is a rondel.
It is a rondel. Okay,
definitely, yes.
I think that one of the unique things about Heaven and Ale is that it's both a rondel and it's a one-way time track game, which I really enjoy. And that you can choose pretty much. You can go, I think, as far as you want on Heaven and Ale's track, and it even incentivizes you to do that to a certain extent because there's better stuff further on the track. If you get to the end of the track first, you get to choose a benefit. But unlike some of these games where you're going around and around, you then have to stop. You then have to stop and wait for other players to catch up, which I thought was a really neat twist in this game. It put extra meaning to how many different spaces along the way that you wanted to gain different benefits and actions. And many of those, I think some of them are printed on the board. It's been a while since I played, but some are printed, and I think some are random. Most might be random on the board, but I like that mix of the two.
It is a fun game. I love playing that with my friends, and I definitely enjoy having a beer with it when we play that way.
Yeah. Nice. So that's Heaven and Ale at number 5. What is your number 4, Kaleb?
So right behind me is the ancient section. So I think I thought I had it here, but now of course I can't find it. That seems appropriate. There's so many T games. It's Teotihuacan. Yeah. Oh, here it is. One section over. There it is. City of Gods. The fact that I can say Teotihuacan without blinking an eye means that this game has had a positive impression on me for the last several years. And this is not a simple, easy game. And I think they've made it better and harder with the many additional expansions. I actually have every expansion in one box, and it fits. And I know they have a Kickstarter for the deluxeified version of sorts. This one, it takes that dice mechanic, as your meeples are the dice, and you move it up to so many spaces around the circle, eight spaces, and then where you land, how many other people are there, and how many of your own guys are there, depending on how much it costs to use the action. I really find it heavy thinking, fun, beautiful, challenging game, and it's such a unique mix of mechanics that there's very few things that come close to it. And the alternate one that does have a similar mechanic and is a much smaller box is Red Cathedral, which I didn't have in my top 5, but I put this one in there instead. So Teotihuacan is my number 4.
I think this one too is a good reminder that you can have an interesting and compelling rondel without having that many different actions to choose from or spaces. Like I think maybe there are 7 or 8 tiles in that game that compose the rondel.
Just 8.
Just 8.
So both Iki and Teotihuacan only have 8.
Oh, that's
spaces.
Right. You mentioned that too. Yeah. And that while there's, especially in Teotihuacan, which I can't pronounce, I'll continue to mispronounce it. The spaces are very robust. There's a lot going on each space, but just 8 of them. So I think that's really clever. They distilled it down to only 8 actions. My number 4 is Wonderland's War, a game that I unfortunately have only played once, but I really enjoyed that play. And a big part of the game is this card draft that's built into the rondel. It's like the tea party stage of the game where you're moving a token around the table to claim a card. And you do that a few times. I can't remember exactly how many times you do it, but you're kind of just walking around a table and drafting a card from that table. And it's just it was a neat little twist on a card draft. Instead of passing cards from one player to the next, instead of just putting them on the table, you have them associated with these different seats at the table, and you're moving around. Have you played this one?
Awesome. I have it. It's absolutely beautiful. I love the art. I have not played it.
Yeah,
and it's on my relatively short list of 20 games I need to play sometime in the next year.
Nice. Well, if you like rondels, I think this one counts as a rondel, and I think you'll enjoy it.
I will check it out.
That's Wonderland.
Number 3.
Number 3, yeah.
So this is the one that got me thinking about rondels this year. Woodcraft.
Woodcraft.
Now this delicious games, I have been impressed with every one that they put out so far. I love Underwater Cities and many others that I'm not going to mention, but Woodcraft, I don't like the art. That's my negative about it. You can see on the front, I'm like, okay, you're crafting dice out of wood by these pixies or some folks. But in the middle is that nice rondel. You can see there on the board. Now you can choose any of the main actions up to a point. Basically, you can take it 3 or 4 times before it hits the end of the wheel and says, okay, no more. Now, there's ways to still take that action, but you have to move something else forward instead. And then the wheel in the middle also incentivizes you. The further along the actions, the ones that are least chosen, become incentivized within the board itself instead of having things placed on top. I love that. I think that just got me so excited about it. There's lots of other things going on. It's definitely a point salad in many ways, but this use of the rondel was unique enough and exciting enough to me that I had to go look more into this mechanic. Woodcraft.
That's what I'm hoping to play very soon. That sounds like a lot of fun. Is it easy to learn? It looks pretty complex. It is not.
No,
Okay.
it's not. Unfortunately, I played it, and then 2 months later, I just spent 20 more minutes reminding myself what the iconography meant. I feel like you need to have an aid on the side to say, "Oh, by the way, this is what this means." Because once you're like, "Oh yeah, it makes sense," but it's like Seven Wonders. You need to play it a few times before it really becomes obvious and simple.
Yeah. You mentioned Underwater Cities. I think that has the same effect. But once you know it, there's so many interesting decisions to make in that game. My number 3, and now that I'm reading my own definition and hearing your definition, probably is not a Rondel game, but I'm going to say it anyway. Aura et Labora. So Aura et Labora uses really a resource wheel or dial. I think they probably call it a rondel, but in the definition that we're talking about, it is more that these resources accumulate on a dial, and as you take resources off this dial, you shift it. And I believe it might automatically shift every round as well to accumulate more things on that dial. And it's just a nice resource accumulation system, similar to, it's the same designer as Agricola, which also has resource accumulation, but all built into this central dial that creates some nice interaction. I think that's a lot of what we're talking about today. These rondels create interesting interactions between players. Are you going to jump ahead and take something before someone else does? Are you going to take this pile of resources that have accumulated on the dial? Again, probably doesn't meet your definition, but have you played Aura et Labora? Are you familiar with it?
So I felt that Aura et Labora was sort of the culmination of the agriculture series by Uwe, and I loved that game, and that mechanic of basically like you have growth, you get more over time, and it was very nice, and I really enjoyed that. But it also meant like, okay, I had to think ahead. How many turns will it be when I have this much, or what I need to have here? What action should I be taking to use it? So I thought about that one, but I went back to my definition of, is it a time like just growth versus an action selection? So anyway, fantastic game.
Well, what is your number 2 then?
Number 2, this series has continued to impress me, and I haven't played the one of the 3, but Viscounts of the West Kingdom. So this is the West Kingdom as the architects and paladins, and Viscounts is the last of this series from Garhill Games out of Garphill Games, I think, out of they're gonna be upset. Australia, I believe.
New Zealand.
New Zealand. Okay. That's where they're gonna be upset. It's like, you picked the wrong island. Anyway, so this is in our library. And it is a true rondel. You have your main Viscount on the board here, and you go around in a circle, choosing of the selections based on how many moves you have to go around. And there's extra costs, or you can't go where somebody else is. And those actions are important. And just like the other ones, you sort of take advantage of what is going to be more valuable and less valuable based on what the people playing, what cards you're drafting, and where you are on the people who are helping you out. And both expansions contribute to this very well and make it fun and enjoyable. And so you can mix and match it a bit. I do have my personal collection one just because I've enjoyed it so much recently, though you can barely tell that this is the Viscounts. I think the biggest disagreement I had with my friends on this one is just how to pronounce it.
I've enjoyed this one, and this one was a big inspiration for my new game Expeditions, because I really like how different random cards are associated with each of those, not every spot on the board, but every section of the board. If you want a specific card, you need to go over there to get it, which I think is a nice thematic way to tie a character or an item that you're finding in Expeditions to a location. Expeditions didn't end up being a rondel game, but for a long time, I was trying to make it a rondel game, and this was an inspiration for it.
Very cool. I'm looking forward to that one quite a bit this summer.
Should if it hasn't arrived already, it should arrive quite soon. It's shipping right now as we're talking. We're filming this in July. People are probably watching this in August, though. It'd be a little bit.
Okay.
So that's Viscounts of the West Kingdom for your number 2. My number 2 is Patchwork, probably the lightest game that we've talked about today. Patchwork uses a one-way time track that isn't a rondel, because you aren't cycling around. You're just kind of cycling in towards the middle, towards the end of the game. But the rondel that I think about in this game are the tiles themselves. At the beginning of the game, you form a giant circle of random tiles in Patchwork. All the tiles go out on the table. Perfect information. You can see everything. But on any given turn, the only tiles you're allowed to choose from are the next 3. So you have this token that you're moving along this tile track. You can choose from the next 3. And I love it. I love that system, that all the information is out there. You can kind of plan ahead to see, okay, I really want to get that tile. I need to make sure I can get that tile. So it can fit into this specific space, this polyomino space on your board. And I think it's pretty unique as rondels go. Would you say this classifies as rondel?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
This is by far my most played rondel game. Usually with my mother or my daughter or someone else, and it is so fast and fantastic. And you have that, I can only choose one of the next 3, but this is what I really want to get to, and how far, what should I do? Am I going to have enough buttons? And I had the plastic blue buttons, and there's like 10 different versions, which I like normally I wouldn't care for, but I have them all. But my favorite is the Halloween.
Is it just aesthetically different, or is there anything else
aesthetically different?
Just
yep,
aesthetically.
Exactly.
Okay. Cool. Well, that's Patchwork at number 2. Down to your number 1 favorite rondel game.
Yeah, I thought this would be hard, but once we played it, and I hadn't played it in many years, and then I played it again, I was like, when I first was playing games, really into games over 10 years ago, this was like, wow, this is really hard. But I played it a couple of times since then, and it actually seems like completely straightforward and no-brainer. And it's in our library over here. So it's in the ancient section. Trajan. So this is Stefan Feld at maybe one of his finest games. You know, he's the king of point salad games, in my opinion. And Trajan has many different things you can do on the board, but you don't get to do any of them until you use the Mancala rondel action on your own player board. And I love how this is done. And this is, you know, similar why I didn't choose Crusaders I Will Be Done, because it has a very similar mechanic. So this one has different colors of the pieces that make a difference. But this Mancala is so much fun and challenging to sort of think ahead, like, what am I going to do? And so for the most part, when it's my turn, I know exactly what I'm doing because I've had to plan my next 2 or 3 moves out because these things make a difference. Then of course you yell, you're the, you know, the other people you're playing with for taking the action that you wanted to take 2 turns from now because you couldn't do it immediately. But there's always sort of maximizing the benefit of what you can do when you can do it, and just really has aged well. This is a reprinting, and I tried to find the differences, and the only difference I could find is they made the colors a little more contrast on the outside and the box cover a little bit different, but it's exactly the same game, same art, and it just means to me that they found like very few faults with it.
Now, if you can remind me, because it has been a little bit since I played it, but with those colors, is it that so I'm going to pick up all the cubes from part of my rondel, I'll drop one of them off along the way. Is it that if I match the final color with the color of that space, I get a special benefit?
Right here, you can see it here. There's a little piece with 2 blue. If you moving them around and it lands, and so that your final piece goes there, and you happen to have 2 blue in that cup, you not only do this action, but you also get this bonus for matching 2 blue in there. So this actually happens first, and then you take the action there. So it is, they could have actually made it even more complex, but it's just enough to go, ooh, I got to think ahead about which pieces I'm actually dropping off along the way.
I love that. Yeah, that is really, I remember that being really satisfying when you're able to line that up. But it also doesn't feel terrible if you're just taking an action that you want. And the game generally, pretty much on any turn, you can take any of those actions, I think, unless you've really.
That's right. It's fairly forgiving.
Yeah.
It just, and you know, the more you wait and build up for like a big move, the more the clock moves because it takes time for, based on how many of those pieces you move around, which is like, oh, wait a minute, I just ended the game because I had a whole bunch built up and I could end it faster and really upset everybody else who's planning 1 or 2 moves ahead.
It's a great mechanism. I need to get this back to the table. And I'm almost surprised. It's so clever. I'm almost surprised other games haven't copied that exact mechanism, but just applied it to a different interface on the board.
I felt the same way.
Yeah. Maybe we'll see that in the future. So I've just learned that my favorite rondel game is not a rondel game, but I'm still going to talk about it because I love Glen More too. You're totally right. Like you do go around in a circle. I think the one maybe played on Glen More 2, it's pretty small in the box, but it's basically like you said, all tiles. So you're moving around in a one-way action selection track, but you are cycling around this track. And the one play that I have to maybe still call it a rondel is that because it is a limited number of tiles within the circle, it's very clear as to which tile you need to fill in, even though when I'm playing, I often forget to fill in the tile that I've taken away, or the furthest back tile, because it's the player who's in the back that goes. So in this case, if the blue player goes, they're going to pick up their meeple, they're going to place somewhere along the track, and that is a signal to fill in this space that was right behind the blue meeple right there. So that feels like a rondel to me. But maybe it would have been more of a rondel if some of those spaces had been printed instead of random tiles. I don't know.
And I think it's on BGG as a rondel, so it's not like you're wrong. And I think for me, that was my number 2 when I first made this list. And the more I'm thinking about it, I'm like, they just did that because it's convenient on a board. It's really a long line as it goes out, but it's still a fantastic mechanic and such a wonderful game, which is what matters the most.
Yeah, what you do with those tiles is really satisfying. That's another mechanism that isn't related here, but every time you gain a tile, it feels really good. And because you have that full range of choices, do I jump way ahead to a tile that I really, really want at this moment, or just kind of linger back a little bit in the hopes that that tile will still be available? The tension there is always really satisfying, in my opinion. So Glen More 2 is my favorite. I'll put it in quotes, rondel game. But yeah.
Definitely allowed.
Did anything else come to your mind while we're talking here, or anything else that you want to share about?
Well, I have the original Glen More here in front of me, actually, and I think it's worth pointing out as it's under the pile.
It's a smaller box. Yeah.
Oh, look how much. I have Glen More 2 under my computer right here, lifting it up. That's how how big it is. And so, and you can see where a game can improve. I felt like this was a great game, and they made it a lot better, even though the box is really way too big for carrying around at times. But just by adding a few things on the side and making a little more of those decisions a little more important along the way. And this is a hard game to find. And unfortunately, this is one of the reasons why we have Spielbound, because I was finding that I should get more games while I can, so people have a chance to play them, because by the time they're like, oh, I want to play this game, I don't want to spend $200 on eBay to play that game. So have a place where people can come and find and try it out.
Well, I love that. I love that you've built something. I love game cafes, but I love that you've built something beyond that too for the Omaha community and beyond. I think that's wonderful. Well, Kaleb, thank you so much for joining me. This was great to talk about rondels, and I look forward to seeing what designers, maybe me someday. Like I really did try with Expeditions. It did not work out for it to be a rondel game, but I might try again in the future.
But I'm glad you didn't force it. Like I felt like there's a few games on that list that felt like this wasn't really needed. It was sort of something to throw in, whereas others have really made it part of the game. It felt like, okay, this is part of the theme and made a lot of sense. So, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this and our passion for board games.
Of course, yeah. For anyone who's watching this, let us know your favorite. Maybe let us know your favorite game that we mentioned, and then your favorite 1 or 2 rondel games in general and why you love them. And if you want to debate the definition of it, let us know in the comments below. These things are all flexible. At least.
I will add, one of my friends loved Great Western Trail and Maracaibo. I think it was on your list.
Yeah.
And I didn't put it on the end because I felt like there was a clear end, and you had to reset and start over again. And it's like, well, I guess they could have made it a circle, but it was such a hard ending that I'm like, it goes back to what is really the rondel mechanic or not. And those games are so good already. I feel like they're already like in the pinnacle of top games, that it made my choices a little easier by excluding them.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I could definitely see that. And I can also see why people would mention them in the category as well. Goes both ways. Well, thank you, Kaleb. It's been great seeing you. Yeah, thanks for joining this video.
Thank you so much, Jamey. Thank you all for watching. Appreciate it.
Take care. Bye.